I'm not going to give y'all a quiz today, which means there probably will be one on Thursday, right? And the one on Thursday is just going to replace either a missed quiz or a low grade, because we've already done 10. So before we get started talking about MacNeice or anything else, there are a couple of quick things I just wanted to cover with y'all. So one thing I did want to talk about was a possible review session. We discussed this a little bit last week, but we didn't set a time. So I'm just going to break up next Tuesday. That's a week from today. Today is what, the
26th.
Okay, so that doesn't actually help me when counting days. Shit. Okay, so
Sunday's May 1st.
okay, Sunday's May 1st.
Tuesday's.
So Tuesday's the 3rd. Okay. Thank you. All right, so what I'm going to give you here are just the 2-hour blocks during the day when I am available. Not that we'll actually be sitting here doing the review for 2 hours necessarily. We'll sit here, you know, as long as you need it, whether that's half an hour or an hour or 2 hours or whatever, right? Okay, so these are the blocks of time during which I can be available. How many of you would be available 10 to 12 on Tuesday?
Did we have a new problem?
Not that Tuesday, no.
You don't?
Yeah, there are no class meetings next Tuesday, no official class meetings, which is why we'd be doing the review session then. It's the reading day.
Our final for.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you're available 10 to 12. Anybody else?
I'm available all day.
I think on Tuesday.
I think I'm good that whole day,
Okay,
because this was the only class I would have that day.
okay. So, how would people feel about 12 to 2 then? Would that work? Because then I don't have to be here as early.
I was under the impression that none of us here in this department functioned properly before 12 without a lot of coffee.
No, I don't really fully wake up until about 11 typically. I'm up and I'm moving around, but I'm not really there.
I just learned there's a reason that there's no English classes before like.
Yeah, but yeah, we don't do classes before 9:30. Yeah.
I've never seen an 8 a.m. English class, and I hope I never do.
All right, so we'll do 12 to 2 on Tuesday. That'll be our review session. It's optional. You don't have to come, but it would probably benefit you if you did.
When is our final? I can't remember the schedule.
That is
Thursday.
important. 1 to 3.
Yep.
So it's the 5th
Yep.
Yes.
from
From 1 to 3.
1 to 3.
Yep.
Uh-oh. Wait, never mind, sorry.
Yeah, like if you thought the conflict was another exam, it couldn't possibly be because that's kind of the way they build the
I had
schedule.
already written it down and forgot. I forgot what color this class was for a minute, and I was like, what happened?
Okay,
Very confused.
so it was a problem in your color coding system.
Yes, I
All right.
forgot what color this class was.
Okay. So does anybody have any questions about the exam?
It's 2 essay questions, right?
You have 2 essay questions and 15 IDs, you'll choose 8. So you have 3 essay questions to choose 2, 15 IDs, you'll choose 10. You'll choose 10 of the 15 IDs. And I'll give you at the end of this, I'll email everybody at the end of this week a list of vocab terms that I want y'all to know. I figure I'll probably just, there's no need for you to take another vocab quiz this weekend, really. If there are any things that I really want you to carry away from the MacNeice poem and our discussion of it, then I'll just put that on the list of terms I want y'all to know.
So there'll be no vocab quiz this weekend?
No vocab quiz this weekend, yeah.
You made my weekend, thank you.
Well, you know, if it's kind of like at this point, if I can, you know, kind of like maybe take one more little thing off your plates, then that's probably not a bad thing. All right, so any other questions about the exam? Okay, does anybody have any questions about the paper? So the proposal is due tomorrow, right? And I think somebody in my Britlit 2 section pointed out a discrepancy on the assignment sheet. I guess in one place it says the proposal should be 250 words, and another it says it should be 500. Because that's my fault that I put put those discrepant numbers there, go with 250. Yeah, as long as you give me 250 words, that should be enough.
No, we do midnight Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay, and the paper too, we'll be doing midnight too.
Yeah, that will also be due at midnight next Friday.
Can we go over those 2 days one more time? I have Monday.
Monday? Monday the 9th?
For paper too.
Okay, let me double check, let me just make sure of when.
Wait, so the paper proposals due Thursday?
Yeah.
Proposals due Thursday, yeah. Yeah.
Thursday at midnight? Yes.
Yeah, let me just double check the academic calendar here, because I think they might have done something screwy. Okay, so let's see. All right, yeah, no, that's, yeah, if I told you the 9th, then it's the 9th.
Okay.
I just had to double check that. I thought that exams and everything were over at the end of next week, just
Okay.
kind of like, and like I apparently have to have grades in by the 11th, but the 11th is a Wednesday, so that still gives me time. You know, I can grade 4 papers in 48 hours, right? That's not,
There's not many of us.
yeah. That's
There
not.
were 30 of us, they'd be a problem.
If there were 30 of you, yeah, I would have to have given you an earlier due dates. Or else it really half-assed the grading. Okay, anything else? So, right, proposal due Thursday at midnight. Exam is next Thursday, 1 to 3. And then, yeah, the paper is due Monday the 9th. One thing, I mean, and y'all probably know this by now, I don't know if you are, you know, if you sell your books back, but please make sure that you at least like photocopy any texts that you are going to need for finishing your paper. Because I just say this because I've had this happen fairly frequently in the past, where students sell their books back before they write their paper, and then they're trying to figure shit out without a book to go from, and yeah, don't do that. Yeah, or you know, if you need to borrow a copy from me, come talk to me. But yeah, like that's also an option. Okay, so if there are no further questions, let's just quickly go over the vocab terms from last time, and then we'll get into Louis MacNeice. Okay, objective correlative. What's an objective correlative?
A set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of a particular emotion.
Okay,
Makes you feel something.
yes. And who originally formulated this idea?
Good question. Elliot?
Yeah, it's T.S. Eliot's idea, right? But where do we see it in application?
Wasteland?
Yeah, probably in the wasteland, but we didn't talk about it then, right?
It
We
was
discussed
Easter
it.
as I walked in the public art.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we talked about this in the context of the autumn poem, right? All right, good. All right. Who were the Republicans in the context of the Spanish Civil War?
They were the leftist party that was siding with the current government.
Yes, the Republicans were the elected leftist government. All right, and can we attach this to a particular text?
On Spain, 1937.
That is the most reasonable one, yes. All right, Jeffrey Grigson's new verse. included the name of the editor here to help you differentiate it between all of those other new things that were.
That was the anthology that published the Auden Group's poems, right?
It's
There is
actually
an
not.
anthology, but there's also a magazine, because I went
Mhm.
back and I looked it up so I could add one
Yeah.
to my definition, and I came up with an anthology.
New Verse was the magazine. New Country and New Signatures were the anthologies.
If you look it up online though, like if you go
Mhm.
to like a search engine and type in Joffrey Greg Simpson New Verse, it actually brings you an anthology.
Okay, there may have been there was a published anthology of New Verse poets as well.
It was
But
confusing, so I went to
yeah.
your class
Yeah.
video and read the transcript.
What this was primarily was a magazine that was published from 1933 to 1939, right? And yeah, it published the Auden Circle and a lot of their compatriots.
It confused me too. I was like, what?
And it stopped printing because of World War II and shortage on paper.
Exactly, yep, paper shortages. Very good, all right. The Auden Circle.
Cecil Day Lewis, Stephen Spender, Louis MacNeice, Christopher Isherwood, and
Mhm.
Auden himself.
Yep.
A group of poets and a fiction writer.
Yep.
And they all came from bourgeois families, and they all went to Oxford, Cambridge.
Yeah, right. The first four went to Oxford.
Isherwood went to Cambridge.
Isherwood, yes. Isherwood went to Cambridge, but was a childhood friend of Auden's. Yes. All right. Good. Parable.
Something that's meant to teach a moral lesson.
Close. It's not a parable in this context isn't necessarily supposed to teach a moral
It
lesson.
expands your moral.
Yes, that's the idea, right? That's the distinction there that Auden is making, right? That a parable is a text that expands your moral universe in some way, right? Rather than teaching you a specific lesson. Good. And we can probably relate this to the poet's tone, right? Propaganda. When I was in high school, I remember listening to a hardcore punk band called Propaganda.
Something that, according to audit, is trying to force someone else's beliefs or ideals on you.
Mhm. Yeah, propaganda is trying to convince you of something,
He
right?
quite disliked it.
Yeah. It's trying to convince you to adopt a belief or take action on something. It's trying to get you to do something specific. So propaganda narrows you in some way, right? Whereas parable expands your horizons.
It disrupts, but it doesn't clarify.
Yes. I like that. Disrupts but doesn't clarify. It sounds like an ad slogan. Like, I don't know, like for like the toilet cleaner or something.
That sounds like propaganda.
General Francisco Franco.
A leader of a military coup in the 1930s to
Mhm.
Spanish government.
Yep.
Government.
Yep.
Very fascist ideals.
Yep, General Franco is, the leader of the right wing, the nationalist side in the Spanish Civil War. His side wins, and he remains in power in Spain until 1975. In fact, like you can see if you travel to cities in Europe that were under fascist dictatorships for any period of time, you can actually still see traces of it in the architecture. Like you can see in some cities, like Germany actually did a pretty good job of erasing a lot of it. But if you go to some places in Italy, I was in Portugal a couple years ago for a conference, and buildings that were built during the Salazar dictatorship still often have like a fascist eagle on top of the like above the doorway and things like that. So yeah, you still see physical traces sometimes of this era. Icarus. What do we know about this poor bastard?
is in Greek mythology. He's the son of someone whose name I cannot pronounce correctly. He was a very talented inventor, and they were imprisoned in Crete. Icarus' father has actually built the labyrinth. They were imprisoned in Crete, and his dad fashioned wings of wax and feathers for them to fly out of the prison. And Icarus flew too close to the sun, his wings melted, and he fell into the water. And no one gave a shit. Except his dad. Except
Well,
his dad. But he didn't save him, nor did he go into the water to try and rescue him.
Well, the nobody gave a shit comes from what text
The
that we
thing we
read?
talked about, the poem.
Yes.
I can't say the name of it. I can't. Pronunciation is not our strong suit.
It's okay. Can you attempt it?
The mouse did. Where is it? Someone told me here.
Just try to sound it out.
Musée des Beaux-Arts.
Yeah. Musée des Beaux-Arts. Yeah. So yeah, it's referring to that painting by Bruegel that's described in the poem, right, where Icarus is just a little pair of legs in the corner of the painting, right, while all of this other life is going on around, and the plowmen are still plowing, the fishermen are still fishing, the shepherds are still shepherding, and no one notices this boy drowning off in the corner of the picture, right? So, you know, the idea in the poem being that, like, your personal disasters are not publicly recognized, right? Life and the world go on without you. We're going to get a kind of different attitude towards the intertwining of public and private in MacNeice. All right, silly. In the context of 1930s poetry, what does silly mean?
A kind of ironic way of stating a political commitment.
Yes. So, like, for example, in memory of W.B. Yeats, when Auden says, "You were silly like us," right? You had committed beliefs like we do. And finally, arithmetic versus algebra.
Auden's argument for why prose is different from poetry. Arithmetic and algebra, one has a set in stone scientific answer, while algebra seeks to find a variable. Juxtaposed to that, prose is meant to be informative and give information, while poetry is meant to evoke emotion and provoke questioning.
All right, yes, very good. And this is outlined for us in the Poet's Tongue, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so let's put that to rest. And let's talk about Autumn Journal. So who wants to start us off? With a comment, a question, an observation?
It's got a little sum of everything in there.
Okay.
He can't get over any women, apparently.
Well, it's actually, what it is he keeps circling back to the same woman. He's really only talking about one woman in the poem, his ex-wife.
Okay. And
But,
she had died.
No.
Oh. She was not with the family.
Confused on that. Was unclear to me.
She was not
Okay.
with the family.
Okay.
He was taking care of the kids on his own. I think.
Well, sort of. He does have a son, but it was complicated, right?
The
So,
poems went a lot of places.
what's that?
The poems went a lot of places.
Yeah.
I had to read it online. My copy never came in. So I was just confused. I was like scrolling on my computer. I was
Okay.
like, "Who are you? Who are we?"
I did the same.
Okay.
Same as you.
So I think it might actually help us here to understand what's going on in the poem overall and how the pattern works here. If I actually, like, normally, as you know, like, I don't really give a shit about the writer's biography, right? Like, their life story doesn't much interest me, and I don't think it's always very illuminating when applied to the work. However, in the case of a text like this, which is specifically described as a journal, right? And let's think of it like we actually just were talking about journaling a moment ago, right? Before class started. So when we think of a journal, right? Usually, like, what is this?
Documenting your ideas at a given point in time.
Okay, you're documenting, your own ideas, thoughts, feelings at any given point in time, right? And is journaling usually private or public-facing writing?
It's personal.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of what goes on with journaling is that it's personal. Yeah, it's personal and it is also time-bound, right? So because this is a journal, it would probably help if we knew a little bit more about the journalist here. So MacNeice is born in 1907 in Belfast, in what is now Northern Ireland. I mean, it was the northern part of Ireland then too, but it wasn't like the kind of separate little statelet that it is now. But I digress. His father was an Anglican clergyman. And his mother died when he was very young, after having been kind of like put into a sanatorium for a number of years due to kind of mysterious ailments. So he had little, like, outside of like his, very, very early childhood, he had very little contact with his mother. He's educated at elite preparatory and public schools. So first, at a school called Sherborne, and then at Marlborough College, which is kind of one of the traditional training grounds of the British cultural elites. From Marlborough, he wins a scholarship to Oxford. And it's at Oxford that he really starts to pursue poetry with any kind of seriousness. And while there, he maintains one attachment from his days at Marlborough. His best friend at Marlborough was a guy by the name of Anthony Blunt. Blunt is famous for two reasons. One, he was probably the leading the leading British art historian of the mid-20th century. Two, he was also, for most of his career as an art historian, a spy for the Soviet Union. So he spent the end of his life in jail. But yeah, when they were in high school, he and MacNeice were best friends and continued to be very close into young adulthood. In fact, the portion of this poem in which MacNeice is visiting Spain, Blunt is the person with whom he is visiting Spain. Right? When it says "we" in those various passages, it's talking about Louis MacNeice and Anthony Blunt. In fact, I think there's even a reference. Let me turn to. Right, it's in Canto 6 on page 21. Right, not knowing that our blunt ideals would find their whetstone. I think that's kind of an arch reference there to his friend. So at Oxford, he becomes friendly with another young poet a year behind him by the name of Stephen Spender. And through Spender, eventually gets to know the other Oxford-educated poets, W.H. Auden and Cecil Day Lewis. All from similar backgrounds, right? Day Lewis is, like MacNeice, a Northern Irish Protestant son of a clergyman. Auden's father was a medical doctor. So like they all come from this kind of bourgeois professional background. Now, the other important attachment that MacNeice forms at Oxford is to a woman by the name of Mary Ezra, who is the stepdaughter of one of his professors. While at Oxford, MacNeice is a brilliant classics scholar. He does so well on his exams for graduation that he is offered a post teaching classics at the University of Birmingham. So he moves from, kind of genteel, countrified Oxford to the more industrial, working class British Midlands. And yeah, from 1931, and he takes up his post at the University of Birmingham, and also marries Mary Ezra, a union to which both of their families are opposed. They have one son. They live together in kind of what MacNeice describes here and elsewhere as a kind of fairy tale bubble for 5 years. And then she abruptly leaves him for an American graduate student in 1936. So he's writing this poem from August through December of 1938. So at this point, it's been 2 years since his marriage cracked up. And he's since moved to London. Like in 1936, after the divorce, he moves to a post at a women's college called Bedford College, which is part of the University of London, and takes up residence full-time in London. So, one of the things that this poem is trying to do is interweave the private facts of Louis MacNeice's life with what's going on in the world around him, right? So there's a kind of like there's a push and pull between public and private in the poem. In general, what you're going to see is that the odd-numbered cantos deal with public events, and the even-numbered cantos deal with private life, although this isn't really a fixed distinction, and the two kind of bleed into each other quite a lot. But did any of y'all have a quick look at what was going on in autumn of 1938 that might be in the background of the poem?
War.
Okay, yeah, there is this kind of looming sense of there's still a war going on in Spain, right?
Germany is about to invade Poland. It's a year away from that.
Yeah, Germany hasn't invaded Poland yet, but they have annexed the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, right? So Hitler has started making moves to annex parts of Europe that he believes should historically have been part of Germany. Right? And you know, if that sounds familiar and kind of close to any kind of contemporary rhetoric, yeah, it does. So yeah, that's the big thing that's lurking in the background here, right? Is you've got these fascist governments in Germany and Italy, and Germany in particular is acting very aggressively. Now, there are two important events that occur in late 1938 that inform what's going on in the poem. The first is the Munich Agreement, which is signed on September 30th of 1938. Now, have any of you heard of the Munich Agreement before? Anybody familiar with this?
I've heard it, but I can't give you any information.
Okay. Anybody?
I've heard it, but I'm not confident enough to tell you what it is.
Okay.
I didn't know it was Germany.
I get yeah, well.
I got a sneaking suspicion of it.
That's a pretty safe bet there. Yeah. Well, one, because that's what we've just been talking about, and two, because that's where Munich is. Yeah, so the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, of the Conservative Party, had been pursuing a policy towards Germany that was referred to as appeasement. Now, do any of you know, or can you guess, what appeasement in foreign policy means?
We don't want to deal with you. This is what we will give you if you please just stop.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad way to frame it, right? Yeah, essentially, like Chamberlain was trying to ensure British security.
Just leave us alone, and we will
Yeah.
leave you alone. We just don't want to deal with you.
Yeah, he was trying to ensure British security by making concessions to the Third Reich. Right, as long as these were things that didn't directly affect British interests. So the Munich Agreement was a non-aggression pact between the UK, France, Germany, and Italy, which recognized Germany's claim to the Sudetenland, which was part of what at the time was Czechoslovakia. It's not Czechoslovakia anymore. It's now the Czech Republic. I have a hard time keeping up with this shit too. It was Czechoslovakia when I was a kid. So Chamberlain comes home and says that he has secured peace for our time. And to MacNeice, the kind of peace that Chamberlain has secured is a shameful one. Right. I want to turn to the section where this is mentioned in Autumn Journal, page 28. We have the mention here of the Munich Agreement. Can I get somebody to start reading for us from the top of the page, or from but once again?
But once again, the crisis is put off and things look better, and we feel negotiation is not vain. Save my skin and damn my conscience. And negotiation wins, if you can call it winning. And here we are, just as before, safe in our skins. Glory to God for Munich. And stocks go up and wrecks are salved, and politicians' reputations go up like Jack on the beanstalk, only the checks go down and without fighting.
Thank you. So, how do we parse the attitude expressed here to this agreement?
A lack of morals.
Okay, what here suggests a lack of morals to you
He
specifically?
feels that the agreement comes at a price, and it's at the price of their morals.
Mhm.
It's at the price of their conscience and their ability to feel as though they are ethically and morally correct.
Well, who does he point out is really paying the price for British
Checks.
security? Yeah, the checks go down and without fighting, right?
They didn't have a choice.
Yeah, no one consults them in this. They're not included at the table. These four great powers have decided for them that this is how things are going to be. So, the problem that MacNeice has with appeasement, right, is that it means you're always putting somebody else in the way of the person you're afraid of.
It's like when you're running, you're with a group of people and something's chasing you.
Mhm.
You outrun the slowest person. Then
Yeah.
you live.
Yeah, this is why as long as you are not your slowest friend, zombies aren't that scary.
Exactly. Just don't leave the slowest person in the group.
But yeah, and I think this particular line, like "save my skin and damn my conscience," is particularly telling here, right?
And I think he's upset with himself and all the citizens who are just not saying anything and just living their life with comfort.
Yeah, I mean the first line of the next canto, right, is "now we are back to normal," right? This crisis, whatever feelings it evokes, appears to be for the moment over. But of course, we know it's not. And there's a sense in the poem as well that it's not, right? So the other, like, this isn't going to come up specifically in the half of the poem you read for today yet, but it's going to come up early in the next portion of the poem. So appeasement became an enormous political issue in 1938, the whole idea of appeasement. And essentially kind of what, like, the political battle lines in Britain were temporarily drawn really on this sole issue, right? So 1938 wasn't a regular election year, but there were a series of what were called by-elections. So do any of you know what a by-election is? Or can guess?
It's like in America, every 2 years, there's like representative elections and Senate elections that don't coincide with the president's election. It's an off-year election.
You're close, but even those off-year elections are still regularly scheduled, right?
Something about the word "by." Sorry, continue.
Go ahead.
Something about the word "by" just makes me think that it has something to do with buying or not giving people a choice.
Okay. Well, I mean, you know, you can have this asshole or this asshole, right?
Exactly.
It's like kind of like a mock election, kind of like a poll, see how people feel about the government.
No, it is a real election. But think about it. Okay, so like, for example, a couple, in 2020, right? Johnny Isaacson retired without finishing his term for health reasons, right? So Kelly Loeffler was then appointed to his seat until an election could be held to fill it, right? And then Raphael Warnock was elected in a special election.
Don't they just do like elections whenever they're like, it's like if people are disagreeing with something, they're like, okay, let's vote on it?
They can. The prime minister can call an election at any time.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm
Yeah,
thinking of.
yeah. But I think they have to elect a new parliament every 7 years. So that's what the general schedule is. But usually there are two things that can trigger an election. One, the prime minister decides it's a favorable moment for his party, which I think is what Boris Johnson has done with these last couple of elections. He says, okay, the polls suggest that the Conservatives are going to get more seats, so we'll have an election. Or there's a vote of no confidence in the prime minister and the government coalition falls apart. That's the other thing that triggers an election in the parliamentary system. They have to form a new government. In fact, that's the thing. If I don't know how much any of you follow world politics, but this was one of the reasons why there was such a mess over elections in Israel over the last couple of years, was because they kept being unable to form agreements to form a new government. So they had to keep having more new elections. Right, so by-election is essentially it's a special, this was all a very long explanation, probably a little more confusing than it had to be. But a by-election is a special election. So, on August 7th, 1938, the Conservative MP for Oxford died. So, an election was held on October 27th of that year to fill the seat. And this is one thing that I like about parliamentary systems as opposed to our system. The election season for us usually lasts like 2 freaking years, right? Election campaigns in Britain tend to be really, really short. And elections announced, there's maybe a month of campaigning, and then you have the vote, and that's it, right?
They don't drag on for like 5 years and then talk about it for another 10.
Yes, that is correct. And I think that there's actually something beautiful about that.
Just a little bit.
So the two candidates in this by-election were Quinton Hogue, who was the official Conservative Party candidate and who was pro-appeasement. MacNeice had known Hogue personally at Oxford and intensely disliked him. Thought very, very little of him. The other candidate was an Oxford don by the name of A.D. Lindsay. And Lindsay was an independent candidate running under the banner of the Popular Front. So the Popular Front was an alliance between leftist, centrist, and conservative politicians who were anti-appeasement. Right. The official Labour Party and Liberal Party candidates withdrew from this election to allow Lindsay to run instead as the Popular Front consensus candidate. And Lindsay was anti-appeasement. And MacNeice actually became very deeply personally involved in campaigning for A.D. Lindsay. This is most of, when we get to Canto 14 next time. That covers the Oxford by-election. And of course, because this is the way these things tend to work out, who do you think won?
One seems like the Ross Perot kind of type, so I'm going to say the conservative one.
Yeah, Quinton Hogue won. appeasement was actually fairly popular with the electorate. Because it guaranteed their safety for 10 years, right? Yeah, I mean,
Does it?
well, we now know that it didn't, right?
Were we sure in the first
Yeah.
place?
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, people were voting for what they thought was going to keep them safe, and of course, it didn't, right?
They were very
The anti-appeasers were right.
I
Yes.
just have a really stupid question. You said Neville Chamberlain was the prime minister. I thought Winston Churchill was the prime minister during the war.
Churchill is the prime minister during the war. Chamberlain becomes so tainted by his association with this idea of appeasement, which is popular in 1938,
Not popular.
not so popular in 1939 after the invasion of Poland. It's like, hey, wait a minute, y'all weren't supposed to do that.
You told me
Okay,
you
so they
wouldn't.
just were like, get out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's one of those situations where there's a vote of no confidence. There has to be a new election, and Chamberlain's no longer the party leader after that. Then Winston Churchill takes over. Yes. So Churchill is the prime minister for most of the war, and then is prime minister again in the 50s. But yeah.
We had a whole new life to me, remember?
Yeah. Well, Chamberlain is usually invoked these days as like an example of like cockeyed naivety in a politician. It's like, really? Like you trusted those assholes?
He probably heard about it and was like, they lied to me. Very shocked.
Churchill, a good guy.
Ask me an easy one.
I didn't know. I thought he was like a dictator or something, but I think I don't know.
No, well, Churchill was like it is kind of like the dominant British personality in the war years, pro-imperial, generally pro-colonialist, all of which were positions that were very much associated with the Conservative Party at the time, pro-imperial. In a lot of ways, not a great human being, but managed to run a unity government during the war that kept the country together in an extremely difficult time, right? So yeah, the government that Churchill ran actually wasn't a conservative government, at least not for the entire war. For much of the war, it was a coalition government with members from the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, and the Labour Party. And then Churchill was a better wartime prime minister than he was a peacetime prime minister. And he was probably then, rightly replaced after the war by Clement Attlee of the Labour Party, who was responsible for a lot of the kind of social welfare policies that got the country back on its feet in the late 40s. All right, but that's all in the future.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yes. That's all in the future in December 19. We're still we've stopped here now at October 1938, right? That's kind of where we are locked in at the moment. No one sees any of that coming yet. Well, people see it coming, but not Neville Chamberlain.
How?
And if he does see it coming, he's not telling anybody. So there are a couple of things about the poem that I want to about MacNeice's technique that I want to explain that I think will help you to get more out of this, like a couple of images that you can track throughout this, and also some common concerns. So one of the predominant critics working on MacNeice is a Northern Irish academic by the name of Edna Longley, who is a very nice, very pleasant, but also quite formidable woman. Not very tall, pretty intimidating.
Like Dr. Ryan.
What's that?
Like Dr. Ryan.
Taller than Dr. Bryan.
She's a very intimidating.
Yeah, but
Very nice.
less intimidating when actually approached. I work on MacNeice, so it's a small community of scholars right now. There are maybe like 7 or 8 people who do this, and we all know each other. So Longley describes MacNeice as a poet of pattern and flux. So by pattern, what we mean is that there are organizing principles in each of his poems, right? It's not just chaos, things thrown around everywhere. There are recurring images. He tends to use, or at least to play with, traditional stanza and line forms. MacNeice pretty much never writes free verse, and usually his poems rhyme. However, within these patterns, there is often a great deal of flux, which reflects the changeability of particular circumstances. So there are places where these patterns sometimes break, or where the meaning of a recurring image changes. While he does typically write in rhyme, he is especially fond of things like slant rhyme and I rhyme. Does everybody know what slant rhyme and I rhyme are?
I think I'm thinking of a half rhyme. It's a rhyme where phonetically it sounds like a rhyme, but spelled out it isn't.
That's an I rhyme, yes. What you're thinking of there is an I rhyme. So yeah, an I rhyme is a rhyme that only works on the page, right? When you read it silently. If you sound it out, the words don't rhyme. So for example, in Christopher Marlowe's poem, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, the first 2 lines are, "Come live with me and be my love, and we shall all our pleasures prove," right? Love and prove look like they ought to rhyme, but they don't. Slant rhymes are rhymes that are based on either a shared vowel sound or a shared consonant sounds, right? So for example, in Yeats's poem, The Wild Swans at Cool, he rhymes the words swan and stone, right? So this is a rhyme that's based on the repeated S and N sounds at the beginning and end of the words, right? The vowel sound in the middle is different. So that's a slant rhyme. MacNeice is fond of these kinds of techniques, and also of occasional breaks in the rhythm of the poem. So to give you an example of this, there's the canto where he's talking about, in Canto 9, where he's talking about the ancient Greeks, right? And the thoughts that he tends to have when he imagines ancient Greece in his own work as a classic scholar, right? But I can do nothing so useful or so simple. These dead are dead. And when I should remember the paragons of Hellas, I think instead of the crooks, the adventurers, the opportunists, the careless athletes and the fancy boys, the hair splitters, the pedants, the hard-boiled skeptics, and the agora and the noise of the demagogues and the quacks. and the women pouring libations over graves, and the trimmers at Delphi and the dummies at Sparta, and lastly, I think of the slaves. And how one can imagine oneself among them, I do not know. It was also unimaginably different and also long ago. So one thing to note here is that the tone of this is ironic, right? The basic point he's making is that the ancient Greeks were just as terrible as we are. Right? That these character types and these attitudes are all still with us. But do you notice anything, like, where does the rhythm of the poem, like, where does the structure of the poem change?
There's a line, there's a rhyme every second line, and then it changes to every third line.
Uh-huh.
And then, like, even the short spaces, like, when it's coming to an end, it's the second line to each little, I'm not sure what to call it. Anyway, there's, of the demagogues and the quacks and the women pouring libations of the
Yes, the women pouring libations over graves. Now, why would these women be pouring libations over graves?
It's ritualistic, right? Asking me based off the last class or.
Well, it's ritual, and it's something that, like, the women in this instance are probably war widows. So this break here draws attention to that moment in the poem, right? To something that much of the rest of the poem is suggesting we're likely to see again. Right? Given that what he's doing here is drawing an analogy between his own time and ancient Greece, right? So he wants you to slow down and linger over this particular image, right? Of the women pouring libations over the graves of the dead. Because this is coming again. So I think the other thing that I really want to do, I know we haven't really gotten into talking about the poem itself much in detail yet, but we can cover, I think we can cover more ground next time. I want to look at the first canto and read this together, because I think that this will actually give us some insight into the broader concerns of the whole poem. Right. Essentially what this canto does is forecast each of the major themes that the poem is going to take up. So let's start here together on page 3. Right? Close and slow, summer is ending in Hampshire. Ebbing away down ramps of shaven lawn where close-clipped yew insulates the lives of retired generals and